We are Dow. So on the market, you can't buy Dow stock. You have to buy Dow DuPont. But inside, we are busy separating into the three entities. So it's quite a complex environment, as you can imagine. So it's sort of getting married knowing you're going to get divorced. And not even divorced two ways, divorced three ways. So I don't know there's a human kind of analogy that we could use for that. So thank you. So I am Dan Rozinski. So I'll apologize in advance. If you were here yesterday, you'll see some duplicate slides, right? Because our journey has got started, with what I talked about yesterday. I'll expand on a couple of things, especially organization. Because one of the keys, and Renata mentioned it as well, people and as we embark on Industry 4.0, the joining of the systems or the ability to see the difference between IT and OT, I think is going to get less and less, but I'll talk about that. So I'm a manufacturing and engineering technology fellow for Dow. That's basically the senior technical position inside Dow as a company. And it's a group of senior technical people who have expertise across and are expected to apply it across the company. So we have people that are experts in kind of our hydrocarbons business and reactor design, and folks that are experts in separations and distillation, and they will travel the world looking for problems, opportunities to optimize. They're really the key technical folks. My role, I'm a chemical engineer, but my role really, when I was promoted to this spot, was to look after the systems side of manufacturing. So cybersecurity is sort of half my job for manufacturing systems, so I have responsibility for that. The other half is emerging technology. So we are embarked on a pretty aggressive Industry 4.0 journey with robotics and mobility and digital thread and a bunch of other elements. So I have responsibility there too. So. I'm sort of the living embodiment of where those two things come together, because I have to build cybersecurity into every conversation that I have about these advanced technologies. There we go. So this is a kind of a summary of what I talked about yesterday. I kind of built it out yesterday, but the point I want to make is where we are today and in the very near future. This idea that the IT and OT bubbles, you'll see this picture a lot where people show these bubbles and they intersect. One, I believe today, and only in the future it's only going to get worse, that crossover, that intersection between those two bubbles is more than most people will admit that it is today, from a technology point of view. On the right-hand side, on that upper part, you can see what I've done is take the critical elements of any program to be successful, or people, process, and technology. You have to have all three. And what I think has happened, what I know has happened at Dow, and I believe has happened across the industry, is we have combined technology. So our OT systems are using commercial technology, the same basic technology underpinnings that the IT people use, but the processes we use to govern those and manage those are still more separate than the technology is, and the people are even more separate than that, right? So we've got this case where we've got technology that's converging and people and processes that aren't really keeping up. And so what we found at Dow is we embarked on our manufacturing cyber journey 15 years ago, or if Eric Kosman was here, he could probably correct me. It's probably maybe even longer than that. And we were instrumental in helping to write the standards for network segmentation and how do you technically divide up and protect your manufacturing environment. So that was really important, right, to us at the time, and we've done a really good job of that. What we found as we started looking at our program in the last couple of years was that was not enough, right? The threat is growing. We're under constant kind of risk from all sorts of bad actors, and our joining of these two areas, IT and OT, has gotten more and more close and closely linked. So the ideal state, right, if you're going to do this right, is as these worlds converge, you would make sure that the technology, people, and process all converged as well, so that you had overlap that was equal. You don't need to have more overlap in people or process than you do in technology, but you at least ought to be equal. Because otherwise what you do is you get out of balance, right? And you start to have people diverging even though the technology is consistent, right? Or the work process diverges where it doesn't need to, even though you've got some of the same people or technology. So the basic premise in a cybersecurity kind of term was when we started, the air gap actually did exist, right? So I'm trying to see how many older folks are around the room. The air gap, for younger people, it's become just a word you use. I mean, in the old days, there really was an air gap. I mean, the systems were different. I mean, at Dow especially, our Mod 5 design, right? We built the hardware, we built the software, and there was not a connection from it to any other system, right? So there was a real gap there. But as we started moving to commercial systems, right, that were based on commercial platforms, we started realizing that those systems now had the ability to connect to each other. And so we needed to segment those networks, try to protect them physically and put technology in place and design and architecture. Today, and in the very near future, this is only getting worse, right? We have confounded systems, right? And you know, if you go to Bing, and the Microsoft guy at dinner last night thanked me for giving a plug to Bing. You know, it's funny. I use Bing as like a verb. I forget Microsoft even makes it. It's like Google. But if you confound is when you mix something with something else so that the individual elements become difficult to distinguish. And while, as I said, I'm an engineer, manufacturing systems are really what my life is. But what I'm finding is the foundational elements underneath those are becoming more and more confounded. When we start to move to mobility and we start to move to virtual reality and we start to move to, you know, kind of cloud computing and we start to try to take advantage of data architectures like data lakes and you know, service buses and all that stuff, that's stuff that IT runs for the rest of the company. We're trying to implement it in the OT space, right? Because there's business value there, you know? And so our ability to separate, you know, the technology from the people in the process we've got to get better there. And so the rest of my talk will be about what we've done to really focus in on those kind of issues, start bringing those worlds together. Dow is a good shining example, right, of how you can bring IT and OT people together, and we still were not good enough, and so we're getting better. That's sort of the focus for the rest of the talk. So one of the first things we had to do was we had to start crafting our goals, our mission statement, what we were all about, what was the objective of cybersecurity in the manufacturing space in terms of kind of business outcomes, right? And what kinds of things would we have to work on, and then what kind of results could the business and the company expect from us? You know, so, you know, early on we realized that OT security, while the technology is combining, there were big differences in some of the requirements in that space. And so you needed to have IT or OT security people and connect them with the IT folks. We needed to focus in on policies and governance standards and training and do some proactive risk management. One big thing we've learned over the last couple of years is organizational issues, right? And change management have become very, very high areas of focus for us. And I'll talk about that in a second. One of the ways we started trying to bring people together and trying to solve some of these, or at least build this collaboration, was we tried to go to common tools. So I've heard people talk, and there's a lot of talk about you send an IT and an OT guy to training together. That's great. We do the same thing, right? You make them work together to solve a problem or to troubleshoot. You make them spend some time in each other's shoes. That's great. What we've done beyond that is we have taken our IT security team and our OT security team and made them work on things like benchmarks together. So if we had an external benchmark company come in, you know, it wasn't just for OT security. They actually talked to the IT security guys, even if the focus was manufacturing. Maturity assessments, right? Make the IT and the OT people go through that together, right? Do roadmaps together around OT security so that we made sure that it didn't end up with a mismatch. And by just running through that exercise, the IT folks would learn what was important to OT. The OT folks would learn, hey, these IT guys have some good ideas because they've done this historically, right? Another key area, and we did this a couple of years ago, and we've really gotten a lot of mileage and benefit from it, is on the process side, right, on the OT side. There's something called HAZOPs, or hazardous operations assessments. You typically use something called an FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis. And the idea there is you imagine everything that could go wrong in your plant or in a unit operation, and then you talk about what the effect of that would be and how you could mitigate it. Well, if you're if there's IT people here, that sounds an awful lot like, the kind of things we do around systems analysis, right? To try to see what the failure modes are. So when you put an IT and an OT person in the same room and say, I want you to look at the cybersecurity systems, the manufacturing systems, not the process equipment, right? Look at the systems that run our plants and you do this kind of analysis and have an FMEA, expert in the room to help guide it. It was amazing how much cross-learning. And we were able to share that learning up and down the IT and the OT management ranks. So it was a real powerful tool for us. And then some of the other things when you start looking at, joint cyber risk assessments, the cyber risk posture is an interesting one because what we found was we were aiming on the OT side at kind of a risk posture. So in other words, how much risk do we think we're willing to accept and how much investment does it take to get there? That wasn't in step with what the enterprise was doing, right, at the board of directors level, right? So the idea would be that should be a combined risk posture, right? If we're going to do a risk posture for Dow, how much risk we're willing to accept and how much money we're willing to invest, right, to get there, right? That should be for Dow, the enterprise. And that includes all our plants and all our offices and the CEO and everybody else. And I'll share a quick example of that. And then the typical things like incident response and business continuity plans. One of the things I constantly have to tell my OT folks, the engineers and the production leaders and the plant site managers, is the IT guys have a lot of value, a lot of tools and techniques and approaches we can use to help on the OT side. And one of the things I always have to tell the IT people is, don't try to just blindly apply all that stuff on the OT side because it doesn't exactly fit. The method and the approach is good, but you need to keep in mind that the basic requirements on the OT side can be different. So the method may work, but you just have to be sensitive. So, sort of on the one side, there's value in the collaboration. On the other side, make sure you're not just pushing kind of an enterprise approach onto the OT space. So here's an illustrative example. When we look at the organization, right, so this isn't Dow's organization, but it's some of the things we found. And I'll preface this by saying one of the first things we did when we realized that there was at least a possible organizational issue was we looked at our process safety organization. So if you're a chemical company and you adhere to ACC, the American Chemical Council's Responsible Care Code, you have to certify that you, in fact, are following the code for environmental health and safety of your employees, your plants, and the communities that they exist in. And so to implement that, it's not just words on a piece of paper. You actually have to have an organization that is driving those outcomes. And so when we looked at that, we realized that if we're going to start combining our cybersecurity journey with our process safety journey, which was one of our goals, right, was to bring those together with the premise that a system can't be safe, a process can't be safe if it's not secure, right, then we should follow and learn from what our process safety people learn. So, if you go down in the engineering and manufacturing organizations, what we found were there were some key gaps. We had process automation teams that were leaders in Siemens or ABB or Emerson, whatever the platform was. And so they knew everything about that platform and how it worked and how to implement it and standards and guidelines and all sorts of implementation stuff. But really, we didn't have anybody that was associated with those platforms that looked at it from a cybersecurity point of view. And realistically, one of the major points of cyber awareness we need is in those platforms. If we can get to the leader of the ABB platform and start working on how that platform is configured and hardened and built to be more cyber secure, then we can affect hundreds of plants across the Dow network by funneling through those platform leads. Another area was, if you look at the bottom, we got asked the question, and this was about 2 years ago, by our senior VP of operations, Peter Holicki. He said, who's accountable for cybersecurity in my plants? He's accountable for the plants. Every plant reports up through Peter Holicki, right? And he asked, who's accountable for cybersecurity? My first answer was to say, you, Peter, right? Because when it comes right down to it, it's not an IT function to make sure that the plants are operating, just like it's not a safety function to make sure the plants are safe, right? The plant manager, the site manager certifies that he is doing everything he or she needs to do to make that plant safe from a process point of view. And so we need the same kind of level of commitment, right, on the operations side for cybersecurity. So what we found was there was this gap in the ability to deliver some of that skill down into the plants, and also to then own a lot of this new technology, right? We've heard all about Industry 4.0. Like I said, we've got a very aggressive plan. To me, the worlds of emerging technology and cybersecurity in a plant environment, they're coming together and they need to be addressed together, right? And so we are driving a plan that says, okay, what do we really need in our sites? We have small plants, we have big plants, right? It's not going to be the same answer for every site, but what we do know is to have the culture change and to change from cybersecurity as an IT function to cybersecurity as a process safety issue. We need to drive this kind of people accountability down all the way into our plants. And then for Dow, at least, since we're so big, this regional level, right, of how do you actually roll some of this out, where do people go for help, was another key point. We've got all sorts of implementation teams and help for our plants in kind of rolling out systems and rolling out solutions. We need to have the same kind of focus on kind of how we're going to help them, with cybersecurity and leading these emerging technologies. So I would suggest, and what we've told our operations leadership, is this is not a spectator sport. No matter how many people you put into a central cybersecurity group for OT, we need arms and legs and feet and ears and eyes and hands and we need all of that out in the plants. And we need it for a lot of reasons. We need it when something happens so we can respond faster. But the main reason we need it is those people have to start leading the change in the plants, right? So that when right now in Dow, and I heard this yesterday, it was a great quote, I think from, I can't remember who said it, talking about throwing the red flag for process safety. Every operator, every technician, every janitor, everybody in a plant in Dow has the ability and the right to say, stop, I don't think that's safe. No matter what, if they don't think an operation is safe, they have the right to throw that flag and say, stop. And Dow will honor that because safety has been built into our culture. Cybersecurity, if you see somebody writing their password and putting it on a monitor, we don't really have that culture, right? We need to build that though, right? That's, to me, those two things need to be equal, right, in this site of our plants, unless we're going to go back to the days of non-digital equipment, which we're not going to do, right? So a couple other examples, and I'll just run over these real quick. I mentioned FMEA. If you look at the headings there, the threat type and failure mode, and this is, like I said, this is a technique that really was established, at least we've used it very extensively in process safety. The nice thing about using something that's process safety related is the engineers and the operations people, they know this. They do this all the time when they have a process change. And so if you kind of craft the cybersecurity message in a tool they're familiar with, right, then they immediately have some comfort, right, that it means something, right? And for IT people, these kind of evaluations, while they may not call it the same thing, and they may not, it all is the same kind of things, which is, okay, what's the risk, right? What's the vulnerability and the likelihood, and, can we detect it or not? And then what mitigations can we apply to it? And if you look at a risk posture, this is kind of a generic one, but I think every company, you probably have something like this at the very highest level. So the board of directors has something about what risks they're willing to take. We all like to think zero risk is the answer, but it's not. Because zero risk, one, is unattainable, and two, to even get close, you're going to be spending a lot of money and a lot of resources to even get there. And so the question is, where do you really want to be, right? And where does your business, and your potential impact on your people and on the communities they live in, where does that impact fall? And so trying to figure out where you are in this and then making sure that you operate that way. And finally, I mentioned roadmap. So here again is kind of an illustrative roadmap. This isn't all the things we're doing, but it's kind of just an example. One of the things we did very early as we started to assess ourselves was we've always been plugged in with standards. Like I said, we helped write some of them. I helped write the CFAT standards for the chemical industry. NIST is now sort of the framework that we're following. We believe that that's a good, strong way to communicate what we're all about and what we need to do to protect ourselves and to run our cybersecurity program. So those 5 basic or main pillars and how we describe what we're doing in each of those, right? And along the bottom with this organizational assessment and what we need to do there, the change management to get there, because there's a lot of change. People are going to have to change what they do. We're going to have to change some roles. And then looking ahead, right? Never being satisfied with where we are now, but looking ahead to the next challenge. So this, again, wasn't something the OT team came up with, and the IT team didn't deliver it to the OT guys. I mean, we sat in a room for many hours, over many weeks, and hammered this out. What were the things that made sense to do? So the real one is much more complicated. It's got all sorts of stuff that we've committed to do together. And that's one of the key learnings. And like I said, some of the key cross-functional stuff is all about how do you make this change out in the organization. Just one comment about change management. If you don't have a good, solid methodology, and you're a big company like Dow, it's really hard to affect change. You can affect change at one site. You can affect change maybe in a region if it's not too complicated, but you're not going to affect change across the whole company. And so we've signed up to the enterprise approach to how you do change management, and we are driving that through, into the manufacturing and operations, organization. And that's it. So those are just some highlights of our journey. Like I said, focused more on people and a little bit on process than on technology. Thank you.